Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you my 2018 reading wrap up. So rather than doing lists of best and worst books and that sort of thing, I've put together, I think it's 10 questions for myself, kind of like a tag video, but I mean, I've designed this only for me, but if you want to use it and come up with your own answers to it, then that's great. Just let me know if you're going to do that, because that would be awesome. So to start with, I'm going to read out some stats of what I've read this year. So this is compiled partly from Goodreads and partly from my lovely reading spreadsheet that I keep to track all the books that I buy and read. Then I'm going to go into the questions, which I've written down not in the order that I'm going to do them, so if I look confused, that's why. Okay, so let's start with the stats. So the total number of books I read this year was 100 books. I got to 100. It was a slog at the end. I was trying to finish one of my least favourite books of the year at 10 o'clock last night. I'm filming on the 1st of January. I was trying to get through one of the books that I've enjoyed reading least this year, just so I'd hit that golden 100. And I'm sort of slightly amazed that I managed to do it, particularly having had such a bad reading month in November. But then I had a really good reading month in December. So I read 100 books. The total number of pages, according to Goodreads, was 30,653. So that leaves an average of 306 pages per book. I think my longest book was just under 1,000 pages, which was The Wise Man's Fear, and my shortest book was 20 pages, which was a collection of poetry called Whose Idea of Fun is a Nightmare by Stuart Henderson. I've read quite a range of different lengths of books, really. On to the books that I've acquired this year. I bought a grand total of 72 books this year, which is pretty bad. I mean, it's not hugely bad, it's like less than 2 books a week, but it's pretty bad considering I read 100. So, and then I was given 23 books, and I borrowed 42 books this year, mostly from the library, some from family and friends. So that means my net gain of books, I think, is like 136, 137. I've gained 137 books this year and only read 100. So obviously that's posing problems for my TBR. Of the books that were added to my shelves this year, or added to my TBR this year, so of the books I bought 72, I read 22 of those. I was given 23 and I read 5 of those, and I borrowed 42 and I read 33 of those. So that was 58 books of the ones that I acquired this year that I've read this year. That's less than half, and this is why I'm having a problem. I'm acquiring books faster than I can read them, and that's why my TBR is going the wrong direction. We'll get to that in a minute. So the books that I read and the breakdown of those in terms of where they came from, 59 of them were ones that I owned. So some were ones that I bought, was given this year, some were already on my TBR, but 59 of those books were ones that I owned. 36 were ones that I borrowed, so some I borrowed before the start of this year, and actually read this year, and then 5 were rereads. So they were also ones that I'd owned, but I'd already read them, so I count them slightly separately. So in terms of my physical owned TBR, as shown on Goodreads, so if you're new to my channel, my Goodreads want to read shelf is all books that I own that I have not read yet. My goal every year is to get that number to go down, and I just about managed it this year, but only because I've got a massive unhaul coming that I'm going to be filming later today, and I was very strict with myself because I wanted to make sure this number was lower. So at the start of the year I had 549 books on my Goodreads want to read shelf, and at the end of the year I have 539, so it's only gone down by 10, and that is because of my stubbornness at insisting that I'm going to unhaul a load of books. There's a lot to work on here, and I'm going to be filming in a minute my 2019 reading plans, where I'm going to talk a bit more about how I'm hoping to tackle this TBR in the future, because I'm just not doing myself any favours, really. Like, you can see my shelves behind me. The majority of the books on those shelves are ones that I haven't read yet, and it's not okay. I don't have a problem with buying books. I actually do want to read the books that I buy, so I need to curb it a little bit so I can get through some of these books. So in terms of types of books that I read, the majority were novels. I haven't got into what genres they were because I don't particularly care. I read a really wide range of genres. You know that if you watch my channel. The ones that weren't straight novels, there were 3 books of poetry, 16 non-fiction books, and 5 short story collections. So that's pretty good. I like to read at least one non-fiction a month, so I've managed that. I would like to be reading a bit more poetry, a bit more short stories, but I picked a really big anthology of Grimm's fairy tales that I'm still working through, so that sort of slowed me down a little bit on that. For the 2 challenges that I had going this year that I set for myself, so I've been doing the Read Around the World challenge and my Book Death Row challenge. So I read 13 books for my Read Around the World challenge. Well, I ticked off 13 countries. I did read more than that because I started to duplicate some countries, but as unique countries that I have ticked off on that challenge, there were 13, and I read 2 of my books from Book Death Row. I have decided to get rid of a lot of the other books that were on Death Row, and I'm going to film an update on Book Death Row for you as well later today. So you've got all these videos to look forward to. In terms of ratings of the books, I DNF'd 2 books this year. I gave 2 books 2 stars, I gave 20 books 3 stars, I gave 54 books 4 stars, and I gave 24 books 5 stars. So overall, I really enjoyed the majority of books that I read this year, and that's because I'm quite selective about picking books that I'm thinking I'm going to enjoy. So I'm fairly happy with that. That's, I mean, 3/4 of the books I read, more than, were ones that I enjoyed or really enjoyed. So I'm very happy with that as a total. So on to my questions that I picked for myself, and this is where I get confused, so I've done them in the wrong order on the list. So the first question is, what is a book that I most wished I'd got to that I didn't manage to get to this year? And I've actually have picked 2 for this because I break the rules, even the ones I write for myself. So 2 books that I really wish I got to are here. The first is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. So this one, this is my copy that I picked up in a library sale. My friend actually lent me a copy of this and the other 2 books in this trilogy, the Farseer trilogy, right at the beginning of the year, and I haven't got around to them yet, and I feel really bad. I've heard so many good things about Robin Hobb as an author, and I really want to get into her books. It's such a big series, though this is a trilogy, but it's part of a longer series, and I've heard so many good things. So this is one that I really wish I got to, and it's really high on my list for this year, for 2019 to read. And the other one was one that I got right towards the end of the year, but I just didn't have time to fit it in, and this was Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. So this book I won in a giveaway on Twitter, and it's a debut novel, and again I've heard really good things about it, so I really wish I'd had time to read that one, but again it's one I'm planning to read quite soon in 2019. The next question is, what was my favourite book club pick of the year? So I've been a part of the Ninja Book Club, hosted by the lovely Bex. So she runs business Ninja Book Box that produces a quarterly subscription box. They're actually on hiatus for the next 6 months, so there won't be any book boxes or book club for 6 months, but the point of the book club is to promote books from independent publishers. These are small presses, essentially small presses that aren't linked to any of the major publishing companies. And so every month a book is selected that we read. Some months we vote on it, and other months Bex just chooses one. And so my favourite book for our book club was, I think it was our February pick, I can't remember, it was quite early in the year. So this was The Sewing Machine by Natalie Fergie. I've talked about it quite a lot on this channel, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but it's a sort of family saga over various generations, all linked by a sewing machine. So one family is the family of the lady that owns the machine, and the other family is the family of a lady who worked in the Singer sewing machine factory in Scotland. And the story is beautifully woven together. It's a really comforting read. It's going to be one of my favourite comfort reads, I think, when I need a little pick-me-up. And it was just a really lovely book, really easy read. So it's one of my favourite books of the year as well. My next question is favourite new author. So who is my favourite author that I've discovered this year? And again, I couldn't choose between 2, so I'm going to tell you about both of them. So the first one is one that I discovered at the beginning of the year, and that is Becky Chambers. So I was given for Christmas last year The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which I read and I loved, and picked up straight away A Closed and Common Orbit from the library, and then loved that so much that I bought myself a copy straight afterwards, and then had this one on pre-order, which is the third one in the series, Record of a Spaceborn Few. So Becky Chambers is now an author by author for me. Her books are very character driven, they're quite slow paced and not necessarily a lot of plot, not necessarily a lot of things happening, but it's really about the characters and how they react to different situations, and really love the way she writes the characters. They're fascinating. the balance between the humans in the stories and the other species are also really interesting, and the different species she's created are really fascinating. So I mean, I could read anything she writes, and I love the fact that these are companion novels rather than a straight series, so they follow different characters but they are sort of kind of linked. But at the same time, I would really love to hear more about the characters from the original book again, and so I hope that she does go back to those characters at some point. But I mean, she could just write anything and I'd read it. Just really, really lovely book series. If you like science fiction, these are just lovely. If you don't like science fiction, I'd say even give them a try. And then the other one was an author I discovered right towards the end of the year, who has also become an author author for me, who I also have talked about a lot on this channel, and that is Laini Taylor. I picked up Strange the Dreamer as part of the Big Buddy read-along back in September. I really, really loved it. Pre-ordered Muse of Nightmares. I also had Daughter of Smoke and Bone out from the library, which I read just after I read Strange the Dreamer, and I loved that too, and have bought the box set of the rest of the series. I haven't managed to finish that series yet, and there are hints in this book that the two series are linked, and so I'm just waiting to see what else she writes. She just has such a beautiful writing style that I just got so swept up in it. It was just pure escapism, really, and like, the books aren't necessarily easy subject matters. Some really dark and scary and weird stuff happens in them, but she just writes so beautifully that, I mean, she can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned. So she's also an author for me now. I'll be trying to pick up her backlist as well of the other books that I don't have yet, but I'm going to finish the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy fairly soon. Hopefully that's high on my list to finish in 2019. My next category is favourite reread of the year. I only had 5 rereads this year. I don't know, I've got such a long TBR, but I do want to reread more books. I only keep books that I've enjoyed and that I want to reread. There are a couple of old favourites that I do want to reread at some point. Anyway, that's beside the point. The point being that I only had 5 rereads this year, and I've found it hard to choose between 2 of them as to which were my favourites. So I'm going to tell you about both of them, because that's what I do. So my first one was a childhood favourite that I reread this year, which was A Bear Called Paddington by Michael Bond. This is the first in the Paddington series. I have most of the others that I'm going to try and reread, some of them in the year to come, in 2019. I grew up reading these books and have watched the entire original TV series of them, which is just adorable, and don't base the books on the film because the film just did not do justice. I only watched the first of the films, and I'm not going to watch the second one because they just did not do justice to the beauty and the simplicity and the innocence of these stories. They're really lovely books. Paddington is just such a great character. So yeah, looking forward to rereading more of these in the coming year. And one of my favourite books of all time I reread this year, which is Emma by Jane Austen. So I was working through all of Jane Austen's novels because 2017 was the bicentenary of her death. So I started from then to try and reread all of her novels. So this was the last one. I saved it to last because it's my favourite and didn't disappoint. I was worried because I first read it when I was quite young. I think I was a teenager when I first read this, but it held up and it was as good as I remembered. And I've talked about it so much on this channel that I'm not going to go into any more detail now. My next category is favourite book that I borrowed. So I borrowed quite a lot of books this year, as I mentioned. I particularly borrowed a lot from the library, really got a lot of use out of my local library this year. And my favourite book that I borrowed this year was one I'm hoping to get a copy of for myself soon. And I mean, I've tried to pick different books for each of these categories. So A Closed and Common Orbit could have been for this category, or Strange to Dream because I borrowed that initially, or Daughter of Smoke and Bone because I borrowed that initially. But I'm trying to pick unique books. So the favourite book that I borrowed that I haven't already mentioned or don't plan to mention was Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I read this in the summer and it's a really interesting contemporary. It has one of my favourite tropes, which is the unreliable narrator. I love unreliable narrators. It was really well written, it was a really interesting story. Eleanor as a character was fascinating. I loved the twist at the end, and just again, it's another book that's been receiving quite a lot of praise and quite a lot of hype. So I was a little bit reluctant to read it because of the hype, and also a couple of people had really not liked it. People that I trust had really not liked it. didn't like some of the ways that Eleanor's treated by people around her. But I thought that issue particularly was addressed within the book, and I really loved it. I thought it was really well written, and pretty sure I gave it 5 stars. I mean, I know I did, because otherwise it wouldn't be on this list. So my next question is favourite translated work. So I've been doing Read Around the World, as I've mentioned, and I'm trying to read quite diversely for that, and that includes reading books that have been translated from other languages. So rather than trying to pick a favourite Read Around the World book, because some of them are in English, I wanted to really specifically mention some translated fiction that is really powerful. And actually, a little hint here, my favourite book of the year is also translated fiction, but I picked a different book for this category. One I've gone for here is Celestial Bodies by Jokha Alharthi. This was published by Sandstone Press, which is a great little independent publisher, and you often find that the indie presses are more likely to publish translated works, I find anyway, and I've discovered so many great translated works from indie presses, and actually a couple of them specifically specialise in translated works. So if you want to read more translated works, more diverse fiction, definitely check out some indie presses. So this is set in Oman. The author is Omani, so I used it for that country, and this was just really beautiful. I read this in the summer as well, and I definitely want to reread it, because I think I read it when I came back from Ukraine and had the flu, so I don't necessarily remember all the detail about it, but it's about different generations of the same family, and particularly about 3 sisters who have different priorities when it comes to love and marriage, and how that works out for them, and their family relationships. And it was just really beautiful, and a bit speculative in places as well, and slightly sort of fantastical, and the story jumps back and forth between different generations. So that was part of the reason I found it a little bit confusing at times, because I was not well when I read it, trying to work out how the characters in one chapter related to the ones in another. So it definitely will benefit from a reread, I think. But it was just so beautiful and lyrical, and really, really well written and well translated, I would say, as well, to have conveyed the sort of the lyricism of the language. Not that I read it obviously in its original language. Really highly recommend that one. We are nearly there. So my next category is favourite author rediscovery. So this is picking an author that I'd maybe read before but not for a while, or sort of had underrated in the past. So I've picked 2 for this as well, and the first one is an author that I'd underrated in the past, and that is Agatha Christie. So I've got Murder on the Orient Express. I'd read some Agatha Christie in the past, and my dad had quite a number of her novels which he had reread and then given to me, and I sort of was reading them and kind of dismissing them as a little bit. I mean, I did enjoy some of them, but I think I just hadn't quite grasped the breadth of her work and how unique each story is. When I got into BookTube, I discovered Mara's channel, Books Like Woe. When I discovered it, she was in the middle of Project Poirot, where she was rereading all the Poirot novels. Hearing her talk about them just made me sort of wake up to the complexity of these novels that seem so very simple at first glance. And I had not kept very many of the Agatha Christie novels after I read them, and partly that was because the copies I had a lot of them were in bad condition, not because of my dad, because he bought them second or third hand and they were already quite beat up when he bought them. He's very respectful to his books. So I haven't been keeping them, and now I wish I had, and this one was my favourite one that I've read so far. I mean, it's obviously a really well-known and really popular one. I'll just qualify that. I'd been enjoying her standalones, so And Then There Were None, I read a couple of years ago and really loved after I'd seen it on BBC. But I'd sort of kind of dismissed the Poirot and the Marples. But now I want to read all of the Poirots, and I'm taking part in Mission Marple, which Mara's hosting starting this month. I think I just sort of underrated her, and I'm hoping to rectify that. The other author that I rediscovered this year that I've just grown in love for is Marilynne Robinson, who wrote the Gilead trilogy. So the first one's called Gilead, the second one is Home, and the third one is Lila. I read Gilead a few years ago and had kind of forgotten that there were sequels, and then this year I picked up both Home and Lila and really, really loved them. And so now I just want to go out and find all of Marilynne Robinson's other books and read them too, and I definitely will at some point be buying copies of, because I borrowed them all from the library, I will be buying my own copies of that series so that I can reread them at my leisure, because they're just so beautifully written. I'd enjoyed Gilead, but I enjoyed the others even more, perhaps. And again, it was a while ago that I read them now, so definitely will want to reread them in the future. We'll have to get my own copy so I can reread them. Okay, we are nearing the end. Next question is my favourite non-fiction book of the year, and this took me a little while. So I read, how many was it? 16 non-fiction books this year, and there were some of them were really, really good, but the one that I've settled on as being my favourite was Women and Power by Mary Beard. So I read this one right back at the start of the year in January, and it's only very short. It's based on, I think, on a couple of lectures she gave, but I just remember being really struck by it and really moved by it and found it quite impactful, and also this cover is really pretty. As someone who takes an interest in feminism in different spheres, I wrote my master's dissertation on feminist theology. I wish this had been out before I wrote my dissertation, because this gave really good context to sort of the ancient, well, sort of Greek and Roman attitudes towards women that have shaped and continue to shape our society. It's really good. So the next category, and there's some overlap in the last two, so the next category was my favourite indie press. So I've talked a little bit about how I'm trying to read more books by independent publishers, thanks to Ninja Book Box and their influence. So an indie press that I discovered this year that I've grown to really love in a very short space of time is called Peirene Press. So I subscribed to them. This was one of the first books I got on my subscription, which is called And the Wind Sees All. This is by an Icelandic writer. So Peirene is one publisher that focuses on translated works. I think they only publish translated works. I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, this was a really lovely book, and I've only read a couple of the books I've received from them so far, but the other ones I haven't read yet are just, they sound so good, and I can't wait to read them. If you want to read more translated fiction, then Peirene is definitely the way to go. Their subscription is really reasonable as well. I think it's like £35 for the year, and you get 3 books, and you get them at a slightly discounted rate, and you get them before they're available anywhere else, and you're also helping to make sure they can keep publishing books, because that's how they fund their publishing, is largely through the subscriptions. Really worth checking them out. This book was really lovely. This is set in an Icelandic fishing village, and it talks about all the different people that live in the village, and it's really beautiful. And then my favourite book of the year, I read halfway through the year, and I've not shut up about it since. I don't think. It was my favourite book at the halfway point of the year, and nothing's changed, even though I've read some really, really great books. This is a book that's really stayed with me. It's also published by Peirene Press, and it's called Shatila Stories. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce that. I think it's Shatila Stories. This is a collection of short stories written by refugees who live in the Shatila refugee camp, which I believe is in Lebanon. So all of the authors of this book were invited to writing workshops hosted by Peirene Press, and then they wove it together into, it is a collection of short stories, but they're linked to sort of there's a vague narrative that ties all the stories together, and they translated it. It's just so powerful. It's just a real insight into what life is like in one of those camps, and it was just so moving and beautiful and made me cry, and I need to reread it. I want to reread it right now. I can't say enough good things about this book, and because it's independent, they don't get as much recognition as the big publishers, because they don't have the money to throw at advertising their books. So that's why I really do try and talk a lot about independently published books on my channel, because I want them to get the recognition that they deserve. This book is fantastic, and everyone should go and read it. It's just really, really powerful. Really, 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 really good book. So this was my favourite book of 2018. So I really hope that lots of people will go and read it. And that is it. That is 2018 wrapped up. That is it for 2018. It's gone, it's done. We are in 2019. We are nearly at the end of this decade, which is scary. So that's all that I've got for you today. Please let me know what were some of your answers to these questions. What were some of your favourite books of 2018? What were some books that you wish you got to that you didn't manage to fit in? What new authors did you discover? So have a chat to me down in the comments. Please like this video if you liked it. Please think about subscribing if you haven't already, And you can follow me on social media as well, so all my links down below, my Twitter and my Goodreads. Yeah, that's it for today. So thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!